Amanda had always been a figure of resilience and determination. Since she was young, she dreamed of helping people, a desire that guided her to psychiatry. Raised in a deeply religious family, Amanda witnessed a tragedy that marked her childhood: the sudden death of her younger brother Tommy, a victim of a rare disease that doctors failed to diagnose in time. The fervent prayers and nightly vigils of her family had no effect, leaving a young Amanda questioning divine justice. This loss planted a deep doubt about her faith, a shadow that followed her to this day. During her adolescence, she faced another devastating blow. Her mother, the most devout and resilient figure she knew, was diagnosed with aggressive cancer and died after a painful battle. These tragedies shaped Amanda, who decided to pursue a career in psychiatry to help others face their pain. Amanda started her day early, reviewing patients' records before sunrise. She stood out for her humanized approach, listening attentively to stories that many considered delusions. In each session, Amanda became emotionally involved, trying to see the world through the eyes of those society had forgotten. Her eyes, at times, revealed a melancholy that few could understand, a shadow of the past she hid with a gentle smile and comforting words. The empathy she demonstrated was partly a reflection of her own unresolved pains, a continuous effort to find meaning in the suffering she witnessed daily. In her rare moments of leisure, Amanda found refuge in a small chapel near the hospital. Although her faith was shaken, she still felt a strange attraction to the place. She would sit on the worn wooden benches, observing the colorful stained glass and the play of lights they created at sunset. There, she allowed herself to confront her internal demons. Memories of her childhood, fervent prayers, and promises of a protective God mingled with painful memories of loss and helplessness. She questioned the justice and divine silence, seeking answers that never seemed to come. The chapel offered a safe space where she could process these emotions, a place where her internal struggles could be contemplated in silence. The duality of her life, the dedicated professional and the tormented soul, found a fragile truce within those sacred walls. On a winter night, Amanda was called for an emergency. A new patient had arrived, a man in a deep delirium. He spoke of visions, shadows that pursued him, and voices that whispered dark secrets. Amanda, as always, listened attentively, but this time, something in the man's account deeply disturbed her. Marcos, the new patient, seemed to be describing not only his own hauntings, but also touching on fears and doubts that Amanda hid within herself. The connection between Marcos's accounts and the traumas Amanda carried began to form, bringing to light an unease she could not ignore. Amanda began to examine Marcos with heightened caution, looking for clues that could explain his supernatural claims. Marcos's symptoms were strange and disturbing. He heard voices no one else could hear, displayed inexplicable behaviors, and most frighteningly, his body bore mysterious marks that appeared without apparent cause. The nurses reported that he spoke unknown languages during his fits of rage and, in moments of lucidity, cried for help, begging to be freed from something that dwelled within him. Every time Amanda met Marcos's eyes, she felt a chill down her spine. Those eyes seemed to belong not to a human, but to something much older and more malevolent. Determined to help, but also haunted by her own doubts, Amanda knew she would need to confront not only Marcos's demons, but also her own. Determined to unravel the mystery behind Marcos's symptoms, Amanda began to delve deep into his medical and personal history. She discovered that he had been hospitalized several times, always presenting similar symptoms. Reports from family and friends painted an even more unsettling picture. Marcos was an ordinary man until the day he participated in a spiritual retreat in a remote region. After this event, his behavior changed drastically, and he began to talk about encounters with dark entities and feeling a constant presence beside him. Amanda spoke with team members who had interacted with Marcos, trying to gather as much information as possible. The descriptions of Marcos's crises, always involving screams and overwhelming strength, reinforced the sense that something beyond medical science was at play. Despite the disturbing reports, Amanda approached Marcos's case with the skepticism characteristic of a mental health professional. She considered several medical possibilities to explain the patient's symptoms. First, she examined the possibility of schizophrenia, a severe mental illness that can cause auditory and visual hallucinations, as well as erratic behaviors. Amanda also considered the hypothesis of dissociative identity disorder, especially due to the drastic changes in Marcos's behavior and speech, which seemed to come from different personalities. Another possible diagnosis was temporal lobe epilepsy, which can cause episodes of abnormal behavior, as well as auditory and visual hallucinations. For Amanda, the most plausible explanation was rooted in science, and she decided to conduct a series of neurological and psychiatric tests to rule out known medical conditions. She also ordered blood tests to check for chemical imbalances or intoxications that could be influencing Marcos's behavior. Despite all the rational explanations her skeptical mind offered, part of Amanda could not ignore the supernatural reports, especially when the symptoms defied logic and science. The test results began to arrive, and Amanda reviewed each one carefully. The neurological exams showed no significant anomalies in Marcos's brain. There were no signs of epilepsy or tumors that could explain his bizarre behaviors. The psychiatric tests were also inconclusive. Although Marcos presented symptoms of schizophrenia, such as auditory and visual hallucinations, his response to antipsychotic medications was minimal. The blood tests revealed no chemical imbalances or toxic substances that could be influencing his actions. With each new result, Amanda's sense of frustration and unease grew. The diagnoses remained ambiguous, and none seemed to fit completely with Marcos's clinical picture. The medical team began to discuss the possibility of a rare psychiatric disorder or even an unidentified neurological condition. However, Amanda could not ignore the persistence of inexplicable symptoms. The mysterious marks that appeared on Marcos's body at night and the episodes of speaking unknown languages had no satisfactory scientific explanation. While Amanda struggled to find answers within the medical field, a part of her began to accept that she might be dealing with something beyond her understanding. Doubt and curiosity consumed her, and she knew she needed to explore all possibilities, even those that challenged her logic and skepticism. With inconclusive diagnoses and Marcos's symptoms intensifying, Amanda prepared to seek help from unconventional sources, willing to do anything to find a solution. That night, after another frustrating day at the hospital, Amanda decided to visit the chapel. The serene environment offered a contrast to the storm of thoughts in her mind. Sitting on the wooden benches, she watched the twilight light filter through the stained glass windows, creating a play of shadows that seemed to dance to the rhythm of her uncertainties. Closing her eyes, Amanda tried to pray, but the words escaped her lips. The silence of the chapel enveloped her, providing a moment of deep introspection. Amanda reflected on her beliefs, her skepticism, and the possibility that Marcos was facing something truly supernatural. With inconclusive diagnoses and Marcos's symptoms intensifying, Amanda decided to explore less orthodox paths. She began investigating reports of similar cases in old libraries and digital archives of universities, looking for patterns that might offer some clue. She spent sleepless nights reading texts about possessions and supernatural phenomena, diving into books she would normally avoid. Her search led her to contact experts in paranormal and religious phenomena, people she never imagined she would seek out in her medical career. Amanda found herself in a profound dilemma. Trust the science that had always guided her practice, or consider that Marcos might be under the influence of forces that medicine could not explain. Among the sources she consulted, one name stood out: Father Francisco, a local exorcist known for his dedication and knowledge of paranormal phenomena. Amanda was initially hesitant to seek him out, skeptical about the effectiveness of his methods. However, the lack of progress with conventional treatments led her to consider all options. She obtained the priest's contact through a colleague who had heard about him at a seminar on mental health and spirituality. Amanda contacted Father Francisco and explained Marcos's situation. The priest, understanding and supportive, was willing to help and scheduled a visit to the hospital to personally assess Marcos's condition. On the appointed day, Amanda anxiously awaited Father Francisco's arrival at the hospital. The atmosphere was tense, with a sense of expectation hanging in the air. When the priest finally arrived, his presence seemed to bring an unexpected calm to the environment. He entered the hospital with firm steps, wearing his simple habit and carrying a small bottle of holy water and a crucifix. Amanda met him at the entrance and led him to the room where Marcos was interned. As they walked through the corridors, Father Francisco listened attentively to the latest updates on Marcos's condition, demonstrating a patience and serenity that impressed Amanda. When Amanda and Father Francisco arrived at Marcos's room, the tension in the air was almost palpable. The environment was dark and stuffy, with the curtains closed and only the dim light of a lamp illuminating the room. Marcos lay on the bed, restrained as a precaution, his eyes closed and his face contorted in an expression of torment. Upon entering, Father Francisco made the sign of the cross, filling the room with an almost tangible presence of serenity. Amanda felt a mix of relief and apprehension, her scientific skepticism constantly conflicting with the desperate hope that something, anything, could help Marcos. The smell of disinfectant, mixed with the metallic odor of blood, made Amanda shiver. Marcos began to murmur unintelligible words, his voice alternating between desperate whispers and piercing screams. Father Francisco placed the bottle of holy water and the crucifix on the table, beside the bed, and began to pray softly. Each word seemed to reverberate off the walls of the room, creating a dense and charged atmosphere. Amanda, watching closely, felt a strange mix of fear and fascination. Her heart beating faster with each passing second, Father Francisco began the exorcism with solemn calm, opening his prayer book and reciting passages in Latin. He sprinkled holy water on Marcos, who initially seemed unresponsive. However, when the sacred liquid touched his skin, Marcos's eyes suddenly opened, revealing an unusual and frightening glow. He began to writhe violently, pulling against the restraints with enormous strength. The screams that came from his mouth did not seem human, resonating like a chorus of distorted and malevolent voices. The atmosphere in the room grew even heavier, the air charged with an oppressive energy. Father Francisco was undeterred and continued his prayers, raising his voice. He held the crucifix firmly in front of Marcos, who reacted with uncontrolled fury. The patient began to spit and scream blasphemies, his body arching unnaturally as he tried to escape the restraints. Amanda, watching the scene with a mix of horror and disbelief, realized the situation was getting out of control. The room's lights began to flicker, and a cold temperature invaded the environment, as if a malevolent presence was manifesting. Marcos's attacks became increasingly violent. He managed to free one of his hands, clawing at the air as if trying to reach something invisible. Father Francisco tried to maintain his composure, but it was evident he was struggling against a force far beyond his experience. Marcos's voice changed, taking on a guttural and cavernous tone that sent a shiver down Amanda's spine. Objects in the room began to tremble, and an unbearable pressure seemed to descend on everyone present. At the height of the chaos, Marcos let out a scream that seemed to pierce the soul, and his body was thrown against the restraints with a force that made the bed shake. Father Francisco was thrown backward by an invisible force, and his prayers were abruptly interrupted. Amanda rushed to help him up, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. Marcos, now with his eyes rolled back and a malevolent smile on his face, muttered something Amanda could not understand, but filled her with profound terror. The exorcism attempt had failed dramatically, leaving a sense of despair and helplessness in the room. Amanda, gripped by panic, ran from the room and called for help. Her heart pounded uncontrollably as she sought out the nurses. "We need sedatives, quick!" she shouted, her voice trembling with urgency. 2 nurses, John and Lisa, responded immediately and ran back to Marcus's room with her. When they entered, the sight they found was terrifying. Marcus was free from one of the restraints, his movements erratic and violent, while Father Francisco was still trying to recover from the invisible attack that had knocked him down. The nurses, trained to handle extreme situations, acted quickly. John tried to hold Marcos, but the patient's strength seemed superhuman. Lisa, with trembling hands, prepared a syringe with a potent sedative. Amanda helped to immobilize Marcos's free arm, but he thrashed with a violence that seemed supernatural, screaming and murmuring in unknown languages. The screams echoed through the room, creating a cacophony of sounds that heightened the terror of the situation. Finally, Lisa managed to administer the sedative. It took several agonizing minutes before Marcos began to calm down, his movements gradually slowing to weak spasms. His eyes rolled back, and he finally fell into a deep sleep. The room, now silent, was in disarray. The bed had been moved, objects were scattered on the floor, and the atmosphere still felt heavy and malevolent. Amanda, exhausted and trembling, looked at Father Francisco, who was getting up with difficulty. The nurses, also shaken, began to reorganize the room and check if Marcos was truly sedated. "What was that?" John asked, his voice whispered and full of fear. Amanda had no answers. All she knew was that they had faced something that defied all logic and medical understanding. After the chaos in Marcos's room, Amanda turned to Father Francisco, still trying to understand what had happened. "Father, what was that? Why didn't it work?" Her voice was trembling, filled with a mix of fear and frustration. Father Francisco, visibly shaken, took a deep breath before responding. "Amanda, I did everything within my power, but the force we are facing is far beyond my experience and capabilities. Unfortunately, I was not able to perform the exorcism successfully." Amanda felt a heavier burden on her shoulders. Marcos's situation seemed more desperate than ever. "So, what do we do now? We can't leave him like this. We need help." The desperation in her voice was evident. Father Francisco nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "I know someone who can help us. I'll give you the contact information for Cardinal Montenegro. He is a veteran exorcist known for handling extreme and dangerous cases like this. If anyone can face this entity, it is him." Amanda wrote down the Cardinal's contact, a mixture of relief and anxiety growing inside her. "Where can I find him? How do I talk to him?" Father Francisco explained that the Cardinal was based in a diocese in the nearby city and that she should call immediately to explain the urgency of the case. "Don't waste any time, Amanda. Every minute counts." Amanda thanked the priest and with a heavy heart went to the hospital office to make the call that could be Marcos's last hope. Amanda ran to the hospital office, her mind spinning with recent events. She picked up the phone with trembling hands and dialed the number Father Francisco had given her. The line rang several times before a deep, authoritative voice answered. "Diocese of St. Michael, Cardinal Montenegro speaking." Amanda felt a chill run down her spine upon hearing the Cardinal's voice. She took a deep breath and explained the situation in as much detail as possible, from Marcos's symptoms to the failed exorcism attempt. Cardinal Montenegro listened attentively without interrupting, his voice conveying a secure calm. "I understand, Dr. Amanda. Marcos's case seems extremely serious. I have dealt with similar situations before. We need to act quickly before the entity grows even stronger." Amanda felt a wave of hope upon hearing his words. What should we do? How can I help? First, you need to keep Marcos sedated and safe. Prevent him from hurting himself or others. I will gather my equipment and be at the hospital as soon as possible in a few hours. Prepare a room where we can work without interruptions and inform your team to stay away unless necessary. The situation could become dangerous. Amanda thanked the Cardinal and hung up the phone, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. There was new hope, but also the awareness that they would face a formidable challenge. She began making preparations, informing the nurses about the Cardinal's arrival and ensuring Marcos remained sedated. The hospital seemed to breathe in a tense silence as everyone awaited Cardinal Montenegro's arrival, the last resort in a battle against the unknown. Cardinal Montenegro was a legendary figure in the world of exorcisms, a man whose presence inspired both respect and fear. Born in a small village in Italy, he had been drawn to religious life from a young age. His path to becoming an exorcist began when he was still a seminarian, witnessing an exorcism performed by a veteran priest. The experience marked him deeply, revealing a vocation that transcended ordinary priesthood. Over the years, Montenegro dedicated himself to studying and understanding evil in its purest forms. Undergoing rigorous theological and practical training, his name became known in the Vatican and beyond, especially after a series of successful exorcisms that defied medical and spiritual understanding. Cases of extreme possessions, where science had failed and hope seemed lost, were his battleground. Montenegro had faced demons that others considered invincible, using a combination of unwavering faith, deep theological knowledge, and an almost supernatural instinct for detecting weaknesses in the entities he fought. His reputation for resolving extreme and dangerous cases preceded him, making him the last resort for many desperate people. In the silent corridors of the Vatican, stories about his confrontations with malevolent forces were whispered with reverence. Some said he had saved countless souls, facing dangers that could easily destroy an ordinary man. Montenegro, however, never sought fame. For him, each exorcism was a battle for the human soul, a divine mission he embraced with all seriousness and humility. A few hours later, Cardinal Montenegro arrived at the hospital, his imposing and serene presence filling the corridors. Dressed in his vestments and carrying a case of sacred equipment, he was greeted by Amanda, who immediately led him to Marcos's room. Upon entering, Montenegro made the sign of the cross and approached the bed, where Marcos lay sedated, but still showing signs of internal torment. The Cardinal began to examine Marcos meticulously, observing the marks on his body and murmuring prayers as he ran his fingers over the wounds. After a few minutes, Montenegro turned to Amanda with a grave expression. "Dr. Amanda, the situation is more serious than I feared. This is not a simple malevolent spirit. We are dealing with an ancient and powerful entity, a force that feeds on human suffering and has caused great destruction in past lives. The battle against this demon will be long and dangerous, and there are significant risks for everyone involved." Amanda felt a chill run down her spine upon hearing the Cardinal's words. "What can we do? How can we help Marcos?" Montenegro nodded, recognizing the urgency and seriousness of the situation. "We will need a much more robust intervention. I will need to prepare the area with sacred protections and perform preliminary rituals to weaken the entity before attempting the actual exorcism. Additionally, I will need your team's help to ensure Marcos is kept safe and that no one interrupts the process." As Montenegro meticulously examined Marcos's condition, he began to share with Amanda some disturbing revelations about the demonic world. "Dr. Amanda, hell is a place of eternal torment, governed by entities that feed on human suffering and despair. The demons that inhabit it are cunning, ancient, and possess knowledge of macabre rituals that defy our understanding. They seek to corrupt souls and spread chaos among the living." Amanda listened intently, feeling each word of the Cardinal heighten her sense of impending danger. "But there is something more you should know," Montenegro continued, his voice taking on a darker tone. "Demons have a way of connecting with certain individuals in ways that are often inexplicable. They can be drawn by personal traumas, specific events, or even family lineages. Amanda's mind began to spin with these revelations. She had always felt that something dark was following her, an unsettling presence linked to the traumatic events of her childhood. Suddenly, Marcos, even sedated, began to murmur something, his eyes half open and fixed on Amanda. "I was with you before," he said in a voice that seemed not his own. "I was there when your mother died, when she cried and begged for help. I was there, feeding on her suffering, and now I am here to finish what I started." Amanda was paralyzed, the blood freezing in her veins. She remembered the moment when her mother, on her deathbed, seemed to be talking to an invisible presence, begging for relief from her unbearable pain. "This can't be true," Amanda whispered, her eyes wide with terror. Montenegro approached, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "This, doctor, is the connection I feared. This demon is not a stranger to you. It has been in your life, feeding on your suffering and your losses." The revelation left Amanda shaken to her core. She now understood that the entity had a personal and macabre connection to her history, and that this battle was also a direct confrontation with her deepest traumas. Montenegro, perceiving the gravity of the situation, reinforced the need for meticulous preparation. "We need to understand more about this demon, discover its weaknesses, and prepare a robust exorcism. But above all, you need to be ready to face not only the evil that resides in Marcos, but also what haunts your own past." The tension in the room was palpable as Amanda processed these revelations. The battle that was unfolding was not just to save Marcos, but also to free her from the ghosts that haunted her. The true identity of the demon, now revealed, suggested a powerful and ancient entity. Montenegro decided to attempt an initial exorcism, hoping to weaken the entity that possessed Marcos. With Amanda and some nurses watching closely, the cardinal began to recite prayers in Latin, sprinkling holy water over Marcos. The reaction was immediate and violent. Marcos began to convulse and scream, his hands and feet pulling against the restraints with immense force. Objects in the room started to tremble, and a cold wind swept through the room, despite the windows being closed. Montenegro intensified his prayers, but the entity inside Marcos seemed only to grow stronger, mocking and blaspheming with a voice that seemed to come from the depths of hell. After an hour of fruitless attempts, Montenegro retreated, exhausted and frustrated. He turned to Amanda with a grave expression. "Doctor, this demon is more powerful than we imagined. I need more resources to face it. There is a place, an old fortress that has been converted into a monastery. It is a base of operations against demonic forces, where we keep artifacts and ancient texts that may help us combat this specific entity. I need to travel there and gather what is necessary." Amanda agreed, knowing that this was the best hope for saving Marcos. "Go, Father. We will take care of Marcos in the meantime." Montenegro nodded and left the hospital quickly, promising to return as soon as possible. The journey to the fortress, located in remote mountains, was long and arduous. When Montenegro arrived, he was welcomed by the monks who guarded the place. He spent days immersed in ancient texts and forgotten rituals, searching for the key to defeating the demon that possessed Marcos. Finally, Montenegro found what he was looking for, a set of rituals and specific artifacts to combat the entity they were facing. With this knowledge and spiritual weapons in hand, he returned to the hospital. Amanda awaited his return anxiously, and Montenegro found her with a resolute expression. "We are ready," he said. "Let's prepare the room and the necessary people. This will be a long and dangerous exorcism, but with faith and determination, we can win." Preparations for the ritual began immediately. Montenegro instructed Amanda and the nurses on safety measures and the roles of each person during the exorcism. Marcos's room was prepared with crucifixes, blessed candles, and circles of salt for protection. Amanda felt the tension rising, but also a renewed hope. With Montenegro leading the exorcism, she believed they could finally free Marcos from the terrible entity that dominated him. Before starting the ritual, Amanda found a moment to talk to Cardinal Montenegro about what had happened during the days he was away. She was visibly shaken, the fatigue and tension marked on her face. "Cardinal, something terrible has been happening while you were gone. I don't know how to explain it, but the demon has been tormenting me too." Montenegro frowned, concerned. "What do you mean, Amanda? What happened?" She took a deep breath, trying to maintain her composure. "I have been facing terrifying visions, psychological attacks. The demon, it spoke to me, using my mother's voice. It knew intimate secrets that were kept only by me, things no one else could know. Every time I am alone, I feel its presence, whispering, mocking me. I am starting to question my sanity." Montenegro placed a comforting hand on Amanda's shoulder. "This is part of the demon's strategy. It is trying to break your resistance, making you doubt yourself and your faith. They feed on fear and doubt." Amanda nodded, though her expression remained disturbed. "I feel like I'm fighting against my own dark past. Everything I have kept and tried to forget is being used against me. Every mistake, every moment of weakness, everything is being exposed. I don't know how much longer I can endure this." The Cardinal looked at her with seriousness, but also with empathy. "The fight against evil is as internal as it is external. They attack where we are most vulnerable. Your strength comes from recognizing these weaknesses and facing them with faith. Remember, Amanda, that you are not alone in this battle. We are all in this together, and we will win." Amanda took a deep breath, feeling some relief with the Cardinal's words. "I know, and I'm trying to keep the faith. But it is hard, very hard." Montenegro gently squeezed her shoulder. "I understand. Now let's prepare. We need to be strong and united for what is to come. The entity we face is powerful, but with faith and determination, we can overcome it." With renewed determination, Amanda joined the final preparations. Every step taken alongside Montenegro and the team was a step toward the liberation of Marcos, and perhaps the liberation of her own inner demons. The room was prepared, the atmosphere charged with a silent tension as everyone awaited the start of the ritual. The battle was about to begin, and Amanda knew that her faith and courage would be tested to the limit. The exorcism ritual that Cardinal Montenegro prepared was complex and intricate, involving ancient enchantments, mystical symbols, and various protections against demonic interference. Every detail had a specific purpose, carefully planned to weaken and expel the evil entity that inhabited Marcos. Montenegro began by drawing sacred symbols on the floor around Marcos's bed using blessed chalk. These symbols formed a circle of protection, a barrier that the demon would have difficulty crossing. Around the circle, the Cardinal spread blessed salt, forming a continuous line that reinforced the protection. Amanda and the assisting nurses were strategically positioned outside the circle, ready to help if necessary. With everything prepared, Montenegro began to recite the ancient enchantments in Latin, his voice resonating with authority and determination. He held a large crucifix in one hand and a vial of holy water in the other. Every word seemed to carry a supernatural weight, echoing off the walls of the room. Marcos, sedated, began to stir slightly, as if the entity within him was reacting to the prayers. The complexity of the ritual increased as Montenegro progressed. He burned sacred incense in small braziers placed in the four corners of the room, the pungent aroma filling the air and creating an atmosphere charged with spirituality. The Cardinal used an aspergillum to sprinkle holy water over Marcos, who now began to writhe more violently, his screams and murmurs growing in intensity. The mystical symbols drawn around the room included ancient sigils that Montenegro had studied during his stay at the fortress. These sigils were specific to combat the entity they faced, based on forgotten rituals and esoteric knowledge. Montenegro drew a large sigil on Marcos's chest with sacred oil, a focal point for the exorcism's energies. Throughout the process, Amanda watched with a mixture of fascination and apprehension. She felt the energy in the room change, the atmosphere laden with an almost palpable intensity. Montenegro, immersed in his prayers, seemed unshakable, but Amanda knew he was also waging an internal battle against fear and doubt. As the ritual progressed, the tension in the room escalated exponentially. Suddenly, Marcos began to manifest demonic powers in an alarming manner. His eyes, once half open and restless, were now completely black, reflecting a terrifying void. His body contorted unnaturally, and a guttural, malevolent laugh echoed through the room, sending chills down everyone's spines. Objects began to levitate and were violently hurled against the walls. The invisible force moving the objects seemed to grow in intensity, spreading chaos and destruction around. The blessed candles flickered and went out, plunging the room into an unsettling twilight. The salt circle was interrupted when a chair was thrown over it, breaking the line of protection. Father Montenegro continued his prayers, his voice loud and firm, but it was evident that the entity within Marcos was reacting with desperate violence. Amanda and the nurses instinctively recoiled, their prayers mingling with gasps of fear. "Hold firm!" Montenegro shouted, trying to maintain authority in the growing chaos. "We cannot let it break our concentration." Marcos, now possessed by a demonic force, began to pull against his restraints with superhuman strength, breaking one of them and freeing an arm. With a swift, violent movement, he tried to attack Montenegro, but the cardinal managed to dodge in time, continuing to sprinkle holy water on him. Marcos let out an ear-piercing scream, and the room seemed to tremble with the intensity of the sound. The icy wind that had previously only insinuated itself now turned into a furious gust, scattering papers and objects all over the room. The lights flickered and failed, plunging the environment into near-total darkness, illuminated only by the flickering flames of the remaining candles. The malevolent presence in the room was almost palpable, an oppressive force trying to suffocate the hope and faith of everyone present. Amanda, despite the rising panic, tried to maintain her position and continue reciting the prayers. She felt the demon's presence like a shadow over her, whispering her worst fears and secrets. Her mother's face appeared in her visions, mocking and pleading at the same time, trying to break her resistance. With monumental effort, Amanda focused on the words of the ritual, fighting against the darkness inside and outside herself. Montenegro, realizing that the situation was becoming uncontrollable, gestured to Amanda and the nurses. "Reinforce the restraints and be ready to redouble your efforts. This demon is fighting with all its might, but we cannot give up." Amanda rushed to help immobilize Marcos, her hands trembling, but determined not to let the demon win. The spiritual and physical battle reached a critical point, each movement and word carrying the weight of an ancient struggle between good and evil. Amanda knew they were facing an immensely powerful entity, but with Montenegro's guidance and the collective strength of everyone present, there was still hope, a flame of resistance that refused to be extinguished. As the ritual continued, the tension and fear reached their peak. Marcos, now completely possessed, let out guttural screams that reverberated off the walls, each more deafening than the last. The demonic forces within him manifested in terrifying ways, creating visions that affected everyone in the room. Amanda felt her heart pounding uncontrollably as scenes from her haunted childhood and the figure of her mother in agony flashed before her eyes. The nurses also began to succumb to the terrifying visions. John saw his deceased wife, pale and accusatory, while Lisa was haunted by a monstrous shadow that seemed to whisper her worst fears. The atmosphere in the room was dense and oppressive, making every breath a struggle. The malevolent presence seemed to grow, feeding on fear and despair. Objects continued to be violently hurled. The walls seemed to vibrate with malevolent energy. Marcos, with a free arm, managed to strike John, knocking him to the ground. Montenegro quickly intervened, reciting the ancient incantations with even more fervor, trying to reinforce the spiritual barrier they were trying to maintain. He sprinkled more holy water on Marcos, but the entity within him seemed only to grow more enraged, its demonic laughter echoing like thunder. Amanda, fighting her own panic, helped John to his feet. "Hold firm!" Montenegro shouted, his voice cutting through the cacophony of screams and moving objects. "We are close! We cannot yield now!" The Cardinal's determination was an anchor for everyone, a light of hope in the overwhelming darkness. Suddenly, an invisible force pushed Amanda against the wall, knocking the breath out of her. She felt icy claws around her neck, squeezing with supernatural strength. Struggling to breathe, Amanda saw the demon's face, a horrifying figure that shifted forms between her worst memories and fears. Her mother's voice, distorted and cruel, whispered in her ears, trying to break her will. "You will never be free of me," the voice said, echoing in her mind like a living nightmare. Montenegro realized what was happening and directed his prayers toward Amanda, trying to break the demon's connection with her. "In the name of Christ, free this innocent soul," he cried, sprinkling holy water in Amanda's direction. The force around her neck lessened, and she fell to her knees, breathing heavily, but determined to keep fighting. The demon, realizing it was being challenged with greater intensity, redoubled its efforts to sow terror. Visions of fire and darkness filled the room, the walls seeming to melt and reform in a hellish spectacle. The temperature alternated between scorching heat and penetrating cold, further disorienting those present. But even amidst this chaos, Montenegro did not waver. The spiritual battle reached a climax, with everyone in the room fighting against their own visions and the overwhelming power of the demon. Hope seemed tenuous, but the faith and determination of Montenegro and Amanda maintained a fragile yet persistent light in the total darkness. They knew that victory was only possible if they continued to fight together, their forces united against the entity that sought to destroy their souls. At the height of the chaos, the demon perceived a weakness in Amanda and decided to exploit it to the fullest. Its guttural laughter suddenly silenced, and a soft, almost seductive voice began to echo in the room. "Amanda, my dear," the entity whispered, "I know all your secrets. I remember every tear shed, every moment of pain. I can end all of this. I can give you the power you always desired, free you from all your anguish." Amanda, still kneeling and trying to catch her breath, felt the cold manipulation of the demon infiltrate her thoughts. "I was there when your mother died, remember? I fed on your suffering, turned your pain into power. You don't need to fight me, Amanda. Join me, and all your fears and pains will disappear. Imagine the power we can have together." She looked around, seeing the faces of John, Lisa, and even Montenegro, all exhausted and struggling against their own visions and terrors. The demon's voice was hypnotic, its proposal tempting. "I can give you what you always wanted, Amanda. All the pain you felt, all the traumas, can be turned into strength. All you need to do is accept me. Let me in." Montenegro, perceiving the change in the atmosphere and Amanda's internal struggle, intensified his prayers. "Resist, Amanda. Don't listen to his lies. He feeds on your fear and despair. Fight him with all your faith." The demon intensified its manipulation attempts. "Remember the day your mother begged for mercy and was ignored. Remember your helplessness. I can give you the strength to never feel that way again. Just accept my offer. Together, we can dominate fear." Amanda felt her sanity waver, each word of the demon poking at her deepest wounds. But within her, a spark of resistance persisted. She thought of her mother, what she represented, and Montenegro's words about faith and courage. "You will not break me," Amanda murmured, her voice gaining strength. "I am not yours. I will never be." The demon roared in frustration, its voice becoming a cacophony of rage and despair. "You will pay for your insolence, Amanda. You will feel the true power of hell." But even in the face of this threat, Amanda, now strengthened by her faith and the memory of her mother's love, remained firm. Montenegro, seeing Amanda regain her strength, intensified his prayers even more, uniting his voice with those of the nurses. The psychological battle was far from over, but Amanda now had a renewed sense of purpose and resistance. The entity tried everything to break her will, but she clung to her faith, knowing that with Montenegro's and the others' help, she could face and defeat this evil force. The psychological battle Amanda faced was reaching an unbearable climax. The demon, realizing its manipulation attempts had not been entirely successful, redoubled its efforts. Visions of her past began to overlap with reality, making it difficult to distinguish what was real from the illusions created by the entity. She saw scenes from her childhood, moments of happiness now distorted by fear and pain, images of her mother in her final moments of life, begging for mercy, haunted her incessantly. The demon spoke with her mother's voice, pleading and mocking her simultaneously. "Amanda, you cannot escape your fate. The pain you feel is eternal, and I am the only one who can free you." Amanda felt her heart tighten, a sense of despair crushing her resistance. Every word of the demon penetrated deeply, bringing her deepest fears and insecurities to the surface. For a moment, she almost succumbed to the temptation to accept the demon's offer, to surrender to the darkness to escape the pain. Maybe it would be easier, she thought, feeling her strength diminish. But then, a faint light within her began to shine. It was the memory of her mother, not as an agonizing figure, but as the strong and loving woman who always inspired her. She remembered the lessons of courage and faith her mother had taught her, the love they shared, and her mother's desire for her to be strong, no matter the circumstances. "You are stronger than this, Amanda," she seemed to hear her mother's voice say, clear and encouraging. Fighting against the weight of the darkness, Amanda closed her eyes and began to pray, seeking strength in the faith that still remained within her. "Lord, give me the strength to resist. Help me fight this darkness with the light of your love and your truth." Her words began as a whisper, but soon gained strength, her voice echoing through the room. Montenegro perceived Amanda's internal struggle and intensified his prayers, joining her in a chorus of resistance. "Remember the light, Amanda. Darkness cannot prevail where light shines. Stand firm in your faith." The cardinal's words, full of conviction, helped fortify Amanda's determination. The demon roared in anger, realizing it was losing its grip on her. "You will pay for this resistance, Amanda. I will make your life a living hell." But Amanda, now strengthened by her faith and the memory of her mother's love, responded firmly. "You have no power over me. Light always conquers darkness." Amanda's internal struggle continued, a fierce battle between light and darkness. But now, with a renewed sense of purpose and strength, she was determined not to succumb. With every word of faith, the demon's presence weakened, and Amanda knew that although the battle was far from over, she had the strength to keep fighting. The exorcism process reached its peak, and the atmosphere in the room was charged with almost unbearable tension. Montenegro continued his prayers with fierce determination, while Amanda and the nurses stood firm, their voices united in a chorus of resistance. The demon within Marcos fought desperately, manifesting in increasingly violent and terrifying ways. Marcos began to convulse, his body arching unnaturally as deafening screams echoed through the room. The veins in his neck and arms bulged, and his eyes rolled back, showing only the whites. The air seemed to vibrate with malevolent energy, and the temperature alternated between suffocating heat and freezing cold. The environment was in constant flux, with shadows dancing on the walls and the sound of demonic whispers filling the space. The physical manifestations were intense. Marcos convulsed violently, as if trying to expel the entity within him. His body was shaken by uncontrollable spasms, and strange marks appeared on his skin, as if invisible burns were branding him. The screams were mixed with sinister laughter, creating a cacophony of sounds that tested the sanity of everyone present. The nurses struggled to keep the restraints, trying to control Marcos's erratic movements without succumbing to panic. Amanda felt a wave of exhaustion, but the memory of the internal battle she had won gave her the strength to continue. Montenegro, sweating and exhausted, did not back down. He held the crucifix firmly and sprinkled holy water over Marcos, who reacted with screams that seemed to come from the depths of hell. "In the name of Christ, I command you to leave this body," Montenegro shouted, his voice echoing with unwavering authority. Suddenly, a blinding light filled the room, radiating from Montenegro's crucifix. Marcos let out one final scream, a sound so full of agony and despair that it made Amanda's blood run cold. Marcos's body arched one last time, then fell limp on the bed. The room fell into a heavy silence, the atmosphere laden with cautious relief. Marcos was finally freed from the demon, but the victory came at a high cost. His body was covered in marks and burns, evidence of the physical and spiritual battles he had faced. He was unconscious, breathing irregularly, and it was evident that his strength was exhausted. Montenegro, also exhausted, fell to his knees, thanking God for the success, but aware of the grave consequences. Amanda, sweaty and trembling, approached Marcos. She held his hand, feeling the warm, marked skin. "We did it," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. But the reality of what they had faced, and the wounds everyone would carry, both physical and emotional, began to set in. The emotional consequences were palpable. Amanda knew it would take time to process everything that had happened, and that the traumas faced would leave deep scars. Montenegro, while catching his breath, offered words of comfort. "The road to recovery will be long, but with faith and support, we will all get through it." The victory over the demon was proof of the power of faith and human resilience, but also a painful reminder of the costs these battles impose. Amanda, Montenegro, and the nurses left the room with a new understanding of the evil they had faced and the strength they possessed, ready to support Marcos in his long journey of recovery. In the days following the intense spiritual battle, Amanda and Montenegro began to recover slowly, both physically and emotionally. The hospital, once a scene of terror and chaos, was now enveloped in a tense calm, marked by the memory of what had happened. Amanda spent long hours by Marcos's side, monitoring his recovery and reflecting on the devastating experience. Amanda felt the physical effects of the battle in every sore muscle and every wound that needed to be treated. Her thoughts, however, were even more tumultuous. She couldn't forget the moments when she almost succumbed to fear and temptation, the demon's words echoing in her mind. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw flashes of the terrifying vision she faced, the dark secrets revealed, and her mother's distorted face. Montenegro, although exhausted, maintained a serenity that impressed Amanda. He too was marked by the scars of the battle, both visible and invisible. One quiet afternoon, while Amanda was sitting in the hospital garden, Montenegro approached, sitting next to her. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice soft and full of concern. Amanda sighed, looking at the horizon. "I'm trying to process everything. It was a life-changing experience. I feel like I've seen the worst of evil, and at the same time, discovered strengths within me that I didn't know existed." She turned to look at Montenegro. "And you, Cardinal? How are you coping with all of this?" Montenegro smiled slightly, his eyes showing deep wisdom and an understanding of the difficulties they had faced. "Every battle against evil leaves marks, Amanda, but these marks are proof of our resilience and our faith. Dealing with demons is facing darkness itself, both external and internal. The important thing is that we emerged victorious, despite the costs." Amanda nodded, feeling comforted by the Cardinal's words. "Thank you for everything, Father. Without you, we wouldn't have succeeded. Your faith and courage were crucial." Montenegro placed a comforting hand on Amanda's shoulder. You were stronger than you think, Amanda. Your faith and determination were also crucial. Facing your own demons is just as important as fighting those that torment others. The two sat in silence for a while, sharing a moment of peace and reflection. Amanda knew she still had a long way to go to fully recover, but she felt strengthened by the experience. She now understood that light and darkness were always in a constant battle, and that true strength came from the ability to face both with courage and faith. Montenegro stood up slowly, ready to leave. If you need anything, Amanda, I'll be here. Our fight never really ends, but together we can overcome anything. Amanda smiled, feeling a new confidence grow within her. Thank you, Cardinal. We will keep fighting, always. As Montenegro walked away, Amanda looked at the sky, feeling a renewed connection with her faith and a clearer purpose in her life. She knew the road ahead would be full of challenges, but she was ready to face them, strengthened by the battles she had already won and the light that now shone brighter within her. The weeks following the exorcism were challenging for Amanda. Although Marcos was gradually recovering, the traumas of the experience left deep scars on his mind and body. Amanda often found herself lost in thought, recalling the moments of absolute terror she had faced, the demon's manipulations, and the dark revelations of her past. The physical scars were visible, bruises on her arms and legs where she had been pushed and scratched, marks that told the story of a battle against evil. But the mental scars were deeper. Amanda began to question her sanity, haunted by the visions and the demon's voice that still seemed to whisper in her darkest moments. Her faith, which had been an anchor during the exorcism, now seemed fragile and full of doubts. One morning, Amanda looked at herself in the mirror and saw not only the marks of the recent battle, but also the tired eyes of someone carrying an unbearable weight. She knew she needed time to recover, both physically and emotionally. It was then that she decided she needed to temporarily leave the psychiatric hospital. The decision was not easy, but she felt it was necessary for her sanity and to rediscover her faith. She sought out Montenegro to share her decision. Father, I need some time. I need to leave the hospital and everything to recover. My faith is shaken, and I'm beginning to question my sanity. Montenegro listened with understanding and empathy. Amanda, you went through something few could endure. It's natural to feel this way. Giving yourself time to heal is the wisest thing to do. Your faith is strong, but even faith needs to be renewed. Amanda nodded, feeling relief in the Cardinal's words. Thank you for understanding, Father. I just need to rediscover who I am and regain my strength. On the day of her departure, Amanda walked through the hospital corridors one last time, feeling the weight of past experiences. She said goodbye to her colleagues and to Marcos, who was still recovering. She promised him she would return, but needed time to heal. Amanda left for a retreat in an isolated country house, where she hoped to find the peace and serenity she so desperately needed. Away from the horrors of the hospital, she began to confront her inner demons, reflecting on the experience that had changed her life forever. Each day, she worked to rebuild her faith and sanity, finding comfort in the small beauties of life and the tranquility of the countryside. She knew the journey of recovery would be long and arduous, but she was determined to face each challenge with the same courage and determination she had shown during the exorcism. Amanda had changed, but she was willing to use these changes to become a stronger and more resilient version of herself. As time passed, Amanda began to find fragments of peace and rediscover her faith, not as a rigid anchor, but as a flexible and comforting guiding light. She knew that eventually she would return to the psychiatric hospital, ready to face new challenges and help those in need, stronger and wiser because of the battles she had faced and won.